Hello out there. My name is Oscar Carmona. I'm the owner of Healing Grounds Nursery, and I'm also a professor at Santa Barbara City College. I teach sustainable landscaping classes, and I will be debuting a new class this summer called Small Scale Food Production. I'm very looking forward to that. And if you like what you're seeing today, you take an opportunity to check out those classes. I teach some non-credit and credit. The non-credit are completely free, and the small scale food production will be part of that. And if you live anywhere in the state of California, you're eligible to sign up for those classes. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end. But I really want to take the time too to thank Brenton and Jan and Molly and the crew over at Quail Springs for inviting me to come in to share my knowledge and my experiences with you. And I hope that what I have to offer will provide you with some basis for inspiration and opportunity for you to continue on your path to connecting to the earth and creating community and providing nourishment, which is so important for all of us as we move forward into the future. So I want to give a little bit of a background on my sort of my experiences with farming and gardening and food production and some of my influences because they have really given me helped me to develop the perspective that I do have, which I feel strongly about, and you'll see as we go through this um, PowerPoint and presentation that exactly what I'm talking about. Let's just jump right in. I'm gonna share my PowerPoint presentation that I've put together for this. Um, and let me just go back to the beginning here. Okay, so anyway, welcome, and I want to kind of start off by just defining what gardening is. I think sometimes there's a little bit of a debate. I don't see gardening as being inferior to farming. It's just a different focus. And that focus is being really one of size, and also that gardening is more of an endeavor that is fulfilled by individuals and handwork as opposed to machinery. Um, and typically, I guess it's been said that a garden can be up to about 5 acres. I mean, it could be larger, but really, once you start getting beyond 5 acres, you're starting to get into the size of or scale that um, sort of makes it more practical to use machinery to get things done. And you're dealing with uh, quantities and such that also need to be taken into account. Gardening is more about community, family, smaller units that are very important. And I believe in this day and age, we're going to come back to, it's sort of the antidote to the global system, which has so many problems, and we need to start scaling back, and especially with relationship to food and creating microclimates, if you will, pockets of growers that are not growing for the global economy, but growing for their local economy and for themselves. It's truly one of the most empowering acts that we can engage in this day and age. So there's a lot of hope and positive energy that we can extrapolate, that we can get for ourselves, that is really important to recognize at this time. Um, and so I want to talk a little bit about some of my influences. I've been, as I said, I've been involved in farming and gardening for over close to 40 years. And I had the pleasure of, when I was completing my work studies here at UCSB, I happened to go up to Santa Cruz with some friends to who were engaging in farming organic. This was just prior to the official organic movement, but it was seeded. Those energies and efforts were seeded at UC Santa Cruz through the work of Rudolf Steiner, but via Alan Chadwick, who I'll introduce in a second. And this is the sort of the genesis of a lot of that information that was brought by Alan Chadwick, who actually met Steiner at the end of his life. And Alan Chadwick, I'll talk to you about in a second, who is English and came over from Britain to California and started the organic movement. But this gentleman is so important, and the more that I have continued to study him and practice biodynamic techniques, because I firmly believe that these are techniques that provide us with the ultimate um, opportunity for the greatest food density, nutrition, vitality, the very things that we need to sustain us. And it couches the understanding of food to differentiate it from, a burger or, some sort of meal that we maybe have come to love. But really the essence of nutrition are those fundamental organic chemical nutrients that make up that food. If it's not, McDonald's or something that is manufactured in a lab, that isn't really vital. That food is pretty much lifeless. The ability to articulate, even though Rudolf Steiner, he was many things, a philosopher, he was definitely an academic, but he had one foot in the old world, in that his ancestors were Druids and people who really practiced a very integrated and dynamic sort of approach to living that was very enmeshed with the very nature of or natural surroundings and in which they lived, and they were able to perceive to such a degree that I don't think we actually can even recognize today. And there's a tendency, when we look at peoples that lived, hundreds of years before us, or even a couple hundred years, as being not as advanced or as perceptive about the life or about life as they actually were. And so, and this is not just talking about the physical aspects of farming that we can see and do, but the energetic aspects, even including the microbiology, which at that time was just beginning to be understood from a scientific standpoint, but not to the extent that it is today. And yet this gentleman had a profound understanding in his own way of how all of that affected our general health. As a matter of fact, he predicted back in the 20s that we would have an increase in mental illness and an increase in a lot of very debilitating diseases that are persistent today, and because of our disconnection from the fertile soil in which we are very much a part of. And he saw the farm as an integrated unit in which the farmer is the orchestrator, the conductor, and yet at the same time a part of all of that. Not somebody who dominates from above, but is integral and part of and sensitive to and empathetic with every other aspect of that that unit, that broader unit, which includes the cosmos, even that, as I said, the energetic aspect. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second, because that is important to understand relative to nutrition when we get to that part. So to move on and talk a little bit more, as I was saying, about biodynamics, I think at the core of it is the sense that microbiology in the soil plays a key role. It's the cornerstone of this methodology and really of health. And all, the other thing is the sense of natural rhythms, not just seasonal rhythms, but much like the tides, as they rise and fall relative to the moon, We have there is as part of the cycling, this sort of a breathing, and in and out, a time to rest and an active, and a time to be active. So there's a pulsing, like a, you know, like a heartbeat, like a breath, relative to these cycles that make them more dynamic. And as we start to perceive and sort of increase our awareness of what's going on around us through, you know, constant attention and care and concern for the complexities of life and the very sensitive, delicate aspects that are so important. We try to unfold these things into our practices in various ways. And we'll talk a little bit about that. This is an overview, so I really want to kind of give you the broad strokes. Hopefully this is inspiring to you and maybe a surprise, because I'm not going to talk so much about technique, which I can do it to a great length in my other classes, but I want to make sure that I set the stage to give you every opportunity to see exactly what gardening can offer you, and the potential for you to really do some good work, some important work in a garden, and see it rather than being sort of leisure time activity, to being really dedicated, focused, important food production work, right? And so and I want to couch it in the kind of perspective that gives you the opportunity to delve more deeply into the reasons why that is so, okay? So that's why it's important to talk a little bit about these predecessors to modern day gardening that are so important. And these are some of the just a little bit more details about biodynamics. There's some key plants: nettle, yarrow, oak bark, valerian, horsetail, equisetum, that are so, the dandelion, just so important because of their ability to absorb certain nutrients from the soil. Each plant has a key place in bringing up elemental components of minerals and or other nutrients, that, and then to manifest them, or to put them in a form that, once they are broken down into back into the soil, can help sustain fully the soil environment to continue to grow crops at a very high level, ongoing, as opposed to in nature, which is something that, where things happen in and of their own accord to a bigger sort of framework, and not necessarily focused on any one person, specifically. And this is a way for mankind to interface with nature in a very important and meaningful work. I like to sort of make the analogy to surfing, where you have a person who can get in sync with the natural rhythms of the waves. And it doesn't mean that you can go and surf at any time, but there are certain peaks when everything is kind of lining up. And if you go out and surf and you get tubed, or you're working with that sort of element and you're in sync with it, there's a very heightened sense of energy and accomplishment that is created through the combining of the natural energies with your own, and you're in tune and you're floating with that. And that's very much what biodynamics is relative to growing food. And I have much more to say about it. I just want to move on so that we can continue to cover all the materials that I have set forth for you today in this kind of overview. This gentleman is very important, Mr. Rodale, because it was in the 40s that he also, in his own way, recognized that his unhealth, his own physical problems, health problems, it occurred to him was associated with a lack of good nutrition. And he really came to the understanding through maybe divine clairvoyance or some sort of, just, and also through his own efforts and his own work, to recognize that healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people. And so he created the Rodale Institute and started to work on defining the organic kind of term, and certainly as opposed to that line of growing food, which was becoming very popular and continues to today in the commercial vein. Um, so, and interestingly enough, too, I should just backtrack for a second. There was a contemporary of Steiner named Justus von Liebig, who is living in the same country, and definitely at the same time he was a colleague. And he was a scientist who was the first one to synthesize organic chemicals and separate them out, and especially nitrogen for plants, the nitrogen in particular. And he coined the term the law of the minimum. In other words, he was able to look at these individual minerals or organic chemicals and see how they functioned and apply them to plants, and then sort of develop a line of reasoning that supported creating individual or seeing the value of individual organic chemicals almost in a vacuum. It was the antithesis of what Steiner was talking about, which was more of the holistic dynamic approach. And this law of the minimum was snapped up by the contemporary industrialists as a way to promote farming to the new ages and the new masses, and to be able to capitalize on that by creating and synthesizing these nutrients and putting them forth as sort of the modern remedies for healthy plants. And it's just important to know that this was happening simultaneous, and it's parallel, but it's sort of the antithesis of what we're talking about here and what we want to focus on. But to give you some perspective on sort of the global thinking at that time. So organic, is a word that really, until World War I or II, it didn't even need to exist, because there was no such thing as chemical fertilizers or anything like that. People use, if you look at any sort of horticulture book from the turn of the last century, that the word organic is non-existent. But they were talking about composting and manures and all these other things. Their chemicals didn't exist either. So this is a term for the modern ages. It came about through Rodale's efforts and was crystallized in the organic laws that came about after Alan Chadwick, especially, who had a big influence on sort of the codifying of all of that into laws from California. That was the cradle of where this organic term actually became a movement. Anyway, so organic, is derived from the Greek term meaning parts of living things, or the word organism was coined from that word organic, right, or organization. And so it refers to living things, and that is persons, people, and persons, plants, and animals, right? People, plants, and animals, right? So so we're able now to contrast organic from inorganic or commercial. Victory gardens were big. This was the first time that, well, not the first time in history, because throughout, I think as peoples especially became more urban, there was a need to organize food production in the form of some sort of gardening or farming within boundaries, to keep out animals, to be able to culture certain crops that were more popular or more utilized, as opposed to always just hunting and gathering, right? So World War II victory gardens were seen as a way to to really not only provide food for families while a lot of the resources were being expended on the war and the war efforts. It allowed for the citizens still living, back home to be able to sustain themselves, but it also was a rallying cry for a spirit, national spirit and empowerment for people to feel like they were doing their part to help the world, the war efforts and the country in the war in World War II, but also to supply food for people that in need here in the States. And it was an organized effort, and there were posters like this that actually gave you a blueprint for how much to grow for a family of five. What kinds of, uh, of vegetable varieties are you going to grow, and how much. So this is like a historical piece, but it shows the methodical sort of serious effort. It wasn't just fun and games. This was a serious effort to grow food for sustenance. And it was an important time and an important role for gardens in society at that time. Forward up now to the 60s, to a gentleman named Alan Chadwick, who was just very influential in starting, as I said, the organic movement and galvanizing the energy around that movement, and the subsequent development of organic laws that were enacted in the early 80s as a result of his efforts to bring natural systems. He combined the work and his influences from from Rudolf Steiner, along with his knowledge of what is called the French intensive gardening method. And back in the 1800s, the late 1800s, the French were experimenting. They had enough sort of historical background with gardening and their own developing urban areas. They were seriously working at creating urban farms where people could grow food for the market, and also for personal use. And so they took the best of a lot of the biodynamic methodology and used some scientific effort to it. It was like taking the biodynamic movement was started around farms and farming. And the French intensive method was sort of encapsulated the biodynamic theories and principles, but also applied them to small spaces. And so the idea was that you were going to take the best of the biodynamic and then utilize that information and apply it to a limited space, so that you could, with the help of man input, it's kind of like, again, the surfing theme, where with the intervention of man in the flow of the natural system, you could intensify the amounts of food that you could grow in a smaller space, while still keeping the fertility and the vitality of the food, and not getting shortchanged there. So a lot of the beds were planted more densely and closer together, but it was done so with a certain methodology that took into account the way that plants grow and their root systems, including the root systems, and also took into account the soil environment, and took a careful sort of a role in maintaining and managing the soil fertility, and so that they could grow ongoing throughout the year, and be able to not degrade the quality of the soil over the course of the years. Here's some really cool pictures. This is the picture in the middle are French Parisians growing in the French intensive method. And then we have some folks from the 70s. This could be very much, I'm not exactly sure where this is, but it could be up in Santa Cruz, growing food very intensively this is sort of like maybe a small farm, but it's the garden approach. You can see that they have hand tools with them, as the fork and the spade. Those are the, you know, the right and the left, the most important tools really for the home gardener. So so the essence of all of that is that it's all connected, plants, people, and the planet. And this is how, okay? If we look at the organic chemical components of plants, for example, and we're talking about organic things, all living things, plants, people, and in this case, we're not going to talk about animals so much, but the planet, the surface of the planet, it's alive, and we'll tell you why in just a second. But if you just look at the breakdown of the micro and the macronutrients from top to bottom, it's the things that are the most abundant are at the top, going down to the micronutrients at the bottom. Okay, you look at people, and you're going to see that the organic chemical components are the same in the same proportions and in the same sequences. So it just shows without a shadow of a doubt that we are definitely connected. We're the same. We're made of the same stuff. And then you look at the planet, you look at and we're talking about the top 2 feet. That's the root zone, where the interface between the organic matter and you have all the living microbiology and the macroorganisms. That's where they dwell. And that soil contains the raw elemental organic chemical components that are taken up by the plants, that are consumed by the people, right? And now you're starting to understand a little bit about, you know, why I'm why I am framing this talk in this way, because it ultimately will lead us to, you know, the kind of harvest that we desire from our garden, and the kind of food we want to grow. So, you know, the organic cycle, like many wonderful, miraculous, incredible natural cycles, is truly important to recognize and to try to emulate. Much like the turning of the seasons, or the, you know, the night to day, there's this cycling of organic materials. And the materials start in the soil as elemental organic chemical components. They become assembled and into plants that are simple forms, but yet made up of the same materials that get consumed by man, which is a more complex form, organic form. And so these raw elemental nutrients are the sustenance and the building blocks for us and for our health and well-being. And so this is the essence of what food really is, and why we need to really try to understand not only what it is, but how it's created naturally, and how we can support nature to continue to grow that for our own health and well-being. You know, our health depends on our ability to remember and to investigate these very processes that are so important for our existence. And as I was saying earlier, you know, it's the sort of the antithesis to the world economy. We need to sort of find ways increasingly to carve out pockets for localized food production in gardens, where it's the most equitable, especially for people with limited resources, to be able to access. And then we look at the living soil, and of course, you know, as I was saying, Steiner didn't necessarily have access to the microscope to culture the microbiology like they do today, and yet he understood. I think empirically he understood, or maybe not, you know, quantifiably or empirically, but he understood so intuitively, and through his observation, and through the practices of his ancestors, what was going on there, you know. And I think people did understand, and maybe it's not in the way that, you know, like they had data or numbers, but they understood. They really did, and they had a wonderful connection to the world in which they lived by necessity. Okay, so in amongst the essence of that living soil is this amazing elemental component of plants called humus. And this is the basic component of compost, and why compost should not be seen as fertilizer. Really, what compost is fundamental elemental part of plants, which is humus, and its microbiology. And it is key, and it really needs to be, plants need it. And really interesting that the word human being is derived from the word humus. And the word humus means earth or ground, right? And it's just an acknowledgement that that people have known all along for forever, that it seems that we are, part of the earth, literally. It is us, and we are that, and when in the organic processing, when we build up just like everything in life, and then it decomposes back down to the elemental pieces to be drawn up anew in creating a new cycle of life. And this beautiful turning of organic materials in building up and breaking down is the backbone of organic farming, gardening, and biodynamic, which again acknowledges the energetic and the vitality aspect of food, and the elemental microbiology, and and as well as the biochemistry. So biochemistry is important. It's something that it's a science. So it's science. It's not airy-fairy stuff. And it's really what helps us ground the information that we've been handed down by people like Steiner, and able to quantify scientifically, what they were trying to share with us, so that we can understand it and embrace it. And we're looking at the biochemistry. We're looking at the empirical, the periodic table of elements, which is where every single element that we would find in ourselves, in living things, as well as the non-organic elements. We're looking at, when we look at, and it's at the atomic level that that this sort of approach to feeding and nourishing ourselves is enacted. It's at the very, very essence of who we are, our DNA. And that's what was so dynamic and powerful about what Steiner was trying to tell us about food, and the importance of its connection, and what vitality is. And I believe that what it is that when you're looking at the atomic level and you're seeing the atoms that spin around the nucleus, that spinning by its through its action gives off the energy, and also the energy is given off through the metabolic processing of these organic chemicals that help us sustain our living existence. So we're looking at this from a very fundamental, very basic perspective, and then we're going to build up from there, right? So this is sort of what the modern day expression of the biodynamic and French intensive gardening looks like. You have tightly spaced plants that are nurtured by hand. The soil is cared for in a way that allows it to maintain its fertility, and provide the plants with everything they need to be healthy and to have high nutrient content, what we say is nutrient density. So now I'm coming to, I'm going to stop here for a second, but I want to start to present to you some elemental techniques and ways to look at your environment, so that you can start to apply this to just about anywhere you're living as far as observing for growing potential. And so I have some formulas or some basic sort of concepts that I want to present now that will frame your ability to take this information that I'm here sharing with you today and apply it directly to wherever it is that you're living, whether that even be in a apartment or a condominium. Once you understand the basic premise and the techniques and formulas for sort of creating and observing a space for growing in your home, you'll be able to apply it anywhere. And so, you know, as part of this overview, I think it's important that I give you some real tools that you can not just facts and figures, because we can talk about that at another time and at length. But in the course of this limited time, I can give you some really good tools that you're going to be able to take and you're going to be able to apply to wherever it is you're living in whatever form you decide. You know, permaculture, whatever you want to call it, you know, it's there. It's all good because I think now what's really neat is and probably the reason why I'm being asked to present here is because there's a melding of a lot of different perspectives, and it's a beautiful thing because there's a lot of healthy cross-pollinating that's happening and remembering that is only going to further the cause of permaculture and the effort of everybody in the world to create food and food security and empowerment and on a localized level. So getting back to the outline, the key here is to be able to recognize the connection, the connectivity, if you will, of the people who happen to live in a certain place and the place wherever they are, whatever those conditions are providing, and the plant and what a plant might need. Now, in nature, plants are growing and they get self-selected, and sometimes people or animals spread seeds and do some propagating that way. But you know, plants have their natural environments that they have evolved to grow in. And if we can observe what those are, and I'm going to talk about some key elemental factors that affect healthy plant growth so that we can recognize that. And then we can observe those 5 factors in a given place where we are and recognize the connection between the plants and the place. And then we can also enfold the goals that people have. Maybe there's a family of 10 and they need a certain quantity of food, and there's certain types of food that they need or want given their resources or their cultural habits or what have you. So I call it the 3 Ps, and we as the gardener are in the middle, and we are folding and sort of enmeshing these 3 equidistant key factors, right? And relative to, oops, let's see here. So in my work, I've really come to boil down what I call 5 environmental factors that affect healthy plant growth. And it's not so much that I've invented any of this stuff, it's just the way that I'm scrambling it or the way that I like to present it, because I think it's really clear and it helps people get a really good feel for observing not only what plants are needing, but also a place, because you can apply these 5 factors not only to the plants, but you want to apply them to any given place, and then you can make a match, right? And so here are the 5 factors. The first thing, and probably the most important thing, is a temperature range. And it is a range. We're talking high and low. And right now, for example, in Santa Barbara, we have an interesting kind of period. First of all, we have pretty much year-round growing opportunities. But and even now, this was like the beginning of March, end of February, we have spring-like days, but it's still pretty cool at night. In other words, the temperatures are going down to the low 40s and even into the upper 30s, and that's still a little cold for the full spring summer activity. Usually we'll get to a place like sometime in May or April where the nighttime temperature will not drop below 50 relatively few times until probably around the late October. And so once we get that low that is above 50, then we're going to really be seeing really steady growth, continual growth of plants. So it's a range, and we use that range to describe a climate. In this case, we live in what we call a subtropical or a Mediterranean climate. And it's pretty much characterized by cool, wet winters and dry summers. Now, wherever you happen to be, at this moment, you need to apply this concept to where you live and looking at the highs and lows there. The other thing to consider, and everything is relative to the sun, and this is really important because plants, being a more simpler form of or organic form, have a really, really important relationship with the sun. And so it happens to be because of the way that they metabolize food. And they do it in the leaves, which is really important to recognize and realize. The leaves are so important. And it's this beautiful process called photosynthesis, where with the help of sunlight, direct sunlight, plants are able to turn minerals and water into sugar. And it's a 12 carbon sugar. It's a really stable and important form of food, not only for them, but for the microbiology that supports the plants. They have this symbiotic relationship, right? And so the plants are providing them with these sugars, these carbohydrates that they need to survive. And so they in turn protect and help the plants get what they need. It's a wonderful, we're just starting to understand the complexities of those relationships that are going on. So sunshade is really important, and some plants have evolved. We're going to see. I'll talk a little bit more about it. Some plants have evolved to grow under the shade and under other plants as understory plants and get more shade. Other plants have evolved to be out in the open, and so they have sun all day long, and that's what they are accustomed to getting. We just need to recognize where these plants are coming from and what they require relative to sun and shade. And then we know that also that's going to change throughout the year, right? And the thing about Santa Barbara that's so special is that we're a south-facing community, and the ocean is actually to the south of us. It's from Carpinteria to Point Conception. It's one section of the California coastline that doesn't face west; it faces south. And that gives us an unusual sort of advantage in the wintertime, especially when the sun is low to the south and we get a direct hit. And that's why we have major advantages in the wintertime. The third thing is maybe obvious, but soil fertility. That's the life forces in the soil that provide the elemental nutrition for the plants, and also the microbiology that also is important for plant growth. And it's all related. And without that, you can't expect the plants to really get everything that they need to be as healthy and nutrient dense as you would like, or as they would like probably as well. So it's important to recognize that factor. Of course, water is another thing where mostly we'll see, when we looked at those other charts, one earlier that showed the organic chemical components of organic things. The oxygen and the hydrogen, of course, makes water, and we are 75% water. We're made up mostly of water. So are plants in the same proportions. So water is key, right? Water is really important. And then ultimately is, what is the genetic destiny of these plants? What do they want to? What is the genetic code that is embedded in that seed? Telling that plant to do, is it telling it to be a 60-foot kind of upright pine tree? Is it a big, round, strong oak tree? Is it a blade of grass? I mean, everything is there encoded to tell that plant how to unfold. And we can know that information now more than ever because we have access to so much information at our fingertips. And we need to account for that when we place a plant, to give it the space to fully grow. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But when relative to temperature range, we're looking at, the different climates. And it's just interesting to note that the tropical climates are along the equator, the middle of the earth. And then to the north and the south, depending on what hemisphere you're in, are the temperate zones. And that's where we'll find the Mediterranean or subtropical climates. And then as you move to the outer edges of the globe, you get the more Arctic conditions. Okay, and this is pyramid. This shows you by comparison what is the most abundant of the climates. It's, at the bottom, it's the tropic zones, the jungles, provides all our oxygen and so much that helps the stability of our planet. And then the just above that are the temperate zones where we fall into. And then as you go up in the Arctic zones and the tundra, that's up at the very top. And this picture on the very far right gives us a sort of a close-up perspective on just how the sun and affects a space in a way that creates what we call microclimates. Now, if the planet were perfectly flat and there were no buildings and nothing that ever stuck up, nothing ever, the mountains or nothing stuck up that would impede the sun's rays from hitting the ground, then everything would have an even sort of exposure. But that's not reality. We have trees, we have buildings, houses, fences, mountains, all sorts of things. And what that means is that relative to the sun, these things are going to impede the sun in certain ways, and they're going to create variance, for example, in temperature, but also in sun and shade. And these are key things. And this is a way that this plays out in somebody's home, for example, and why in a very small space, you can discern multiple microclimates based on observations of environmental factors, right? And if you look at this picture, you notice the temperature underneath the tree where there's shade is cooler than it is right here where this reflective wall is getting direct sun and kind of reflecting, but it's not as hot as like right out here in the open. So that gives us sort of like hopefully demonstrates how what I'm telling you relative to those five environmental factors applies to the reality of our life. Okay, and then we're looking at the arc of the sun, and we're making observations about that. And sunshade, recognizing the dynamic of plants and how some plants are understory or substories to other plants, and thus they have less of a need. They still photosynthesize, but with diffuse light, as opposed to these sunflowers, which are out in the open. Okay, so we need to recognize this quality in all plants, and every plant is a little different. This is sort of looking at the sun again, and showing a plan that incorporates trees to account for the tracking of the sun at different times of the year. Trees to create, especially deciduous trees that lose their leaves in the wintertime, where, when it's colder, you want the sun to shine through. And so because those trees are without leaves, the sun does shine through. But in the summer, when it's hot, you got these leaves that create shade because they're now impeding on the sun. And they're using the location of these trees strategically for maybe the afternoon sun to create enough shade for the house. Okay. So, but you can apply these same strategies to growing food. So I want to show this one real quick. It's a short little video that is, I thought, really eye-opening because it shows how quickly we can undo. Let's see here. Let me back out of this. I think I already pulled it up. So, oops. Okay. So let me. Okay. So I want to show this little video. It's just short. But what's really cool is
The
this.
soils in
Just
North
listen.
Dakota, the soils in the Red River Valley, the soils in this region are around 15,000 years old. And during that 15,000 years, from the time the glaciers left to the time that they were plowed, there were a series of grasses and forbs, which are broadleaf plants that grew on these prairies, and they were occasionally grazed by herds of bison and other animals, primarily bison. And so it was a kind of a self-contained ecosystem. The nutrients would return to the soil. The plants would break down the primary minerals in the soil, and they would deposit the nutrients that were released in the crop up in the top 6 inches, foot and a half, sometimes 2 feet. And so when the pioneers came in, the first settlers came in and started plowing the land, the land that they were plowing had the accumulated nutrients of about 15,000 years of plant growth. And so the yields that they were able to achieve right after they plowed were astounding. They had wheat yields as high as 70 bushels an acre, commonly 40 bushels an acre, which are yields of wheat that we have today. So we haven't moved a long way from 1885. But things became very serious around 1929, 1930 in North Dakota, and became drier, and there wasn't as much cover, and the crops weren't as good, and the wind started to blow, and the wind just blew, and the soil blew. And during that time, USDA woke up to the fact that the Great Plains were different. The settlers that came in here had no idea that it was going to be this windy. They came from areas in the east where a stiff wind might be 10 miles an hour or so. They came from Bergen and Norway, these shelter fjords and Scandinavia, wooded areas in Germany and France and other places, and here they were. So nobody could tell them what was going to happen, and then the wind started to blow, and they found out that it wasn't the same as Bergen, and so it took a while for people to really understand that this is a different place. The USDA in the mid-1930s, even just halfway through the Dust Bowl, had a memo that reported that 10 million acres of farmland in North Dakota was completely destroyed for any kind of agricultural crop production. The nutrients that were there had blown away. A lot of farmers today think that the soil they lose ends up in the road ditch, and some of it does, of course, but the majority of what's lost is just lost up in the atmosphere, and the question is, where did it go? It didn't go to the neighbors. It's in the Atlantic Ocean someplace. In the 30s, the dust storms that rolled off the plains, including North Dakota, would settle, some of the dust would settle on the cities in the east. And so scientists could scoop up soil in Central Park in New York, for example, and have it analyzed, and they did, and found that the phosphate content was 19 times greater than it was back on the prairies. The potassium content was 45 times greater than what was left in the prairies, and there was 10 times as much nitrogen in that was left in the prairies. So a lot of our native fertility we lost at that time. From the topsoil losses that are estimated by NRCS, from the Dust Bowl to today, we've lost the equivalent of another 30 years of phosphate application. We've lost more phosphate through wind erosion in the state than we have applied as fertilizer ever since. So the tree rows that were put in the 40s and particularly in the 50s. But the idea was to get something growing as fast as possible, because people lived through that hell of the 30s and they wanted to get out of it as soon as they could. So it's distressing to see the tree rows taken out, because they weren't put in for horticultural reasons. They were put in to hold the soil and to stop the horrible loss of productivity and the health issues that were caused by the soil blowing around before the tree rows were put in.
So the reason why I showed that is because it just shows how quickly we can undo, thousands of years of accumulated fertility that nature had created for itself through misunderstandings and unfamiliarity with with new places that people were moving to. And but of course, just like we were able to undo that work that nature had diligently been doing for thousands of years. We can work quickly to recoup that by reversing and changing the ways that we are interacting with the earth around us. So let me continue. So fertility then is, a key component, as I said, of one of the 5 environmental factors, and we're working with manures and composts and mulch, organic matter, especially. We're paying attention to the soil environment to make sure that we're not compacting it, that we're maintaining open root zone, topsoil where the roots are growing, so that the roots can get in there and grow effectively and easily, and do the work that they need to do to be as full of nutrition and vitality as possible. This is a short video that I would like to share with you, that I made a while back, that shows how to worm compost. Worm composting is one of the best ways to create compost at home. Compost happens naturally, but in a contained in a home environment, in an urban environment, we need to, is another empowering act that we can engage in if we're not already. If you consider yourself a permaculturalist or an organic gardener or a biodynamic gardener, you must be composting and mulching and using and returning that organic matter back to the soil as it wants, as it has done through the millennia. And it's important to recognize that this is the cornerstone of our efforts to grow healthy plants. And so this is a little aside, but this is just me talking about the process of creating a worm bin, and what that worm castings really does for the benefit of the soil.
Hey there, Oscar Carmona, owner of Healing Ground Certified Biodynamic Nursery, located in beautiful Santa Barbara, California. Today, I'd like to talk to you about how to vermicompost. Vermicomposting, or worm composting, is a really effective way of turning your kitchen scraps into wonderful, important soil food for the benefit of growing healthy, nutritious, flavorful vegetables and fruits in your garden. You can have a simple open bin using worms. And by the way, the variety of worm is called a red worm or a red wiggler. And those are worms that live in the organic matter layers of soil, which are on the very surface of the soil. They live in leaf piles, they live in manure piles from plant-fed animals such as cows and goats, for example, and chickens. Inside a bin like this, you'll find wonderful material that is being broken down and looks like rich soil, and there's worms also in and amongst the material to be used in the future. And the worms are the agents that basically break down the organic matter and produce very rich form of organic matter called worm castings. For a home environment, and especially if you have concerns about rodents, a contained composting system, worm composting system, may be preferable. Something like this sort of a Tupperware container, which I've drilled air holes around for aeration. Notice they're up high, they're not down low. I want to prevent leakage. If I do want to pour off some compost tea, I'll tip the bin in an area or into a bucket where I can guide the material and not have it seep out onto a patio or into a car port where it will stain and look unsightly. But the worms are contained here, and I simply add my materials. I have strips of newspaper that I use both for a bedding for the worms, and I've moistened that, and also for a sort of a fly barrier to keep pesky fruit flies and hoverflies off my material. And it allows for just ease of use. When you open the material, you don't have a bunch of flies going in your face. They're a nuisance. And this way, you have a nice clean system, actually something you could have just outside your kitchen door at hand. It's going to make your system that much more effective because you don't have to work as hard to get your material into a bin like this. Every 3 months is basically enough time to produce some quantity of compost. You can sift it out and separate the worms, put it onto a tarp, for example, and sift out some of the compost. You can put that in potting soils, put it back into your garden, and it's, as I said, a wonderful return of green waste in the form of raw nutrients back into your soil environment, which your plants will generously and eagerly wick up, providing you with the best nutrition and the best flavor possible for your wonderful meals that you create for family and friends. I'm Oscar Carmona, owner of Healing Ground Certified Biodynamic Nursery located in beautiful Santa Barbara, California. Feed the soil and let the soil feed you.
Okay. That was made a few years earlier in an earlier time, still doing the same work. I think I just thought that would be a nice sort of addition to this presentation of especially talking about soil fertility and remembering that we have another empowering opportunity to engage in the important work of recycling our green waste that we create and not making sure it doesn't go to the dump, but goes back to the earth as it was intended. Such an important thing to do, and to recognize our efforts in that cause. Let's see here. So let's go on. When we think about fertilizers and when we think about nutrition, we're of course thinking about compost, but there's two main things, just to speak generally, because there's much more we can say about this, but for the purpose of this presentation, I just want to talk a little bit about azomite, which is a rock dust, a form of rock dust. It's a really great form of rock dust. You know, it seems counterintuitive that you're thinking, well, why do you need rock dust for the earth? Isn't there rocks in the earth naturally? Well, yes and no. Used to be that, you know, the mineral content of soil was much greater, and now, especially in urban areas, it's become very depleted. And this is one component that is missing, generally speaking, in soils. So it's one of the key things that I believe needs to be replaced when you mend your garden beds or containers. And the other thing is, and not so much that to the emission of other things, but the use of fish and kelp, sort of as a multivitamin, as a everyday sort of fortifying elixir. You know, the goal of fish and kelp isn't to have high concentrations of it used, but it's sort of like a slow drip. And it really is something that you can, especially in with potted plants, or with in situations that are a little less than ideal, you'll want to make sure you're augmenting your nutritional program with some fish and kelp, in particularly in the growing season time of the year, basically from spring through early fall around here where we live. The next thing is water. Water is so important, as I said, and every plant has its rhythm relative to water, and the way that plants absorb water is important to understand because it's a little different, again, than we absorb water, but yet it's so important because plants are made up of primarily water. And the key thing I want you to understand is that plants absorb water through a process called osmosis. And osmosis basically is the process by which fluids are passed through a semi-permeable membrane from an area of greater density to an area of less density. And that's what is happening when water passes through the sort of into the roots of a plant. And it's at a time when the plants are wanting water because they've depleted their water source, their water content. And so they have less density within the plant at that moment. And the saturated soil around has a greater density, and therefore the water will be absorbed until which time there's an equilibrium is reached, and then no more water is absorbed. And what needs to happen then is the water needs to be utilized by the plant, and the soil needs to dry out around the plant a little bit, so that things can sort of recalibrate themselves. And then after a period, whether it's a short period or a longer period, it depends on the plant, we resaturate that soil in the root zone, and then the plant can take up that water anew. Now, the problem is what happens with folks that want to sort of just add water continually because they think it's a good thing. They never allow this recalibration to occur. And so plants can effectively sit in water and not be able to absorb any of it because you've never given the opportunity for there to be any sort of recalibrating of those densities within and without of the and outside of the root environment. So it's important to understand this because and every plant, just like sunshade and nutrient uptake, has their own way with this, depending on the plant. Some plants can go without water for long periods of time because they retain it naturally for long periods of time, and others require recharging of water more frequently. The last thing is the genetic destiny, which is, as I said, the encoded information that is contained inside the seed that tells plants how to unfold, how to mature, what to do, and in their existence, right? And we can know all this information now because we have databases and we have just years of logging and observing of this information. So we don't have to have it in our brain. We can go to resources and references to find out this information, and it's imperative that we do, because without an understanding of the plants, how you can't really ably manage them or do the kinds of things that are going to effectively create the optimal conditions, unless it's just dumb luck, or just by chance, which is okay too. But we're talking about a more methodical, thoughtful approach here. So this is why I'm framing everything in this way. So I want to then lead you from that information. So what does that mean for us? So here's a recent, I already have it queued up. So let me see here. Let me stop sharing for a second. And I'm going to reshare so that I can show this other video that I made. Okay. Oops. So everything I just showed you applies
environmental
here.
factors that affect plant growth, healthy plant growth. That is temperature range, sunshade, soil fertility, water, and space to grow are important, because once you know the factors that affect healthy plant growth, then you can apply it to a place. I'm sitting here in the middle of my family garden, and we're in Goleta, California, and my back is to the south. And right now the sun is over here to my left, and it's about 4 in the afternoon. And we pretty much get midday to afternoon sun. And as we move into the spring, we're going to be getting even more sun directly overhead. We talk about temperature range because it is a range, and the one thing that is affecting us now is that in the morning time we might get into the high 30s or low 40s for sure. It's a little cold, even though we're getting into the upper 60s and low 70s during the daytime. So it's a range, and we need to consider your range wherever you're living, the high and the low, and it's going to change throughout the year. So the second factor is sun and shade. If it were just a blank level field, there would be no variance in terms of how the sun affects the earth plane. However, we have houses and walls and trees and all sorts of objects that can interfere or impede the sun. So we can use those, what we know about those, what we call microclimates, and this is the south face of our house, which because we are a south-facing or south-oriented residents, we're taking advantage of the winter and early spring sun that hits us directly off this south-facing. Or the north-facing side of the house, where we get a lot of shade closer to the house, but where I'm standing on out to the street, it's further enough away from the house so that we can enjoy some of the sun that shines out in the front yard till about 4 in the afternoon. So there's limited sun out here. It's really good, but this is the north-facing side of the house, and you can see how it varies from the south-facing side. So number 3 is soil fertility, and we were talking about soil fertility. We're primarily talking about compost, organic matter. And here's a handful of beautiful worm castings with some wonderful other compost, and it should be on your list for addition to your garden beds on a regular basis. Another great source of soil amendment is chicken manure. Our wonderful chickens provide us with eggs, and they're actually consume our green waste from our kitchen, and they provide us with great manure. Number 4 is water. Plants are primarily made up of water. People are primarily made up of water. We need water in our lives. Plants absorb water through osmosis, so they have a particular way of consuming water. We need to get into the rhythm of the watering needs in your area based on temperature range and sun and shade, which greatly affect water dissipating. So make sure that you have a wonderful system for getting water on a consistent basis into your garden. It's going to make all the difference in the world. Number 5 is space to grow to maturity. This is a mulberry. It's doing fantastic in this container. Find the right varieties that are adapted to contained environments, and you will be able to increase your capacity to grow food tremendously in a very limited space. So you need to consider, and you can easily find that information, what plants want to be when they grow up. What is their genetic destiny? What kind of space will they occupy in your yard? Okay. I think that's that. So there you have it. That's the reason why I shared with you the basic techniques of observational looking at your site for growing potential. And then you can take that information wherever you happen to be on this planet and apply it there. And this is sort of a little illustration of that, microclimates, right? Any local deviation from the climate of a larger area, whatever the scale may be, immediate local climate conditions such as temperature, humidity, solar radiation, wind, etc. Climate of a small area, which is different from a larger area around it, or distinguishable from another small area, really close by. The seasons are, a very acknowledged annual flow, natural cycling that occurs, right? And microclimates can display a lot of the other subtle
cyclical aspects of our environment that are prevalent in wherever we happen to live. And our job is to notice those. This is just another sort of a illustration of how you can distinguish microclimates in a small scale. The most basic way is to, place to look for some obvious ones are simply every side of your house, assuming that it's a rectangle or a square, would be a different microclimate just by orientation to the sun. You know, the east side gets the morning sun, west side gets the afternoon sun. North side, if you're in the northern hemisphere, is facing away from the sun, especially in the winter time, and the south facing area gets a direct hit. So those are, you know, if you, in addition to that, if you have hillsides or the quality of the soil is different from one side to the other, those are additional microclimates that you can discern. Okay, so all of that leads to then this, you know, which is once you recognize again the qualities that affect healthy plant growth and can apply them to a place, then this can grow. And you see a beautiful garden growing on a patio. You see the wall being used as a garden, and relative to those five elemental conditions, or just a regular bed that is just teeming with healthy plant growth. You know, recycled containers along a walkway, upcycled materials that bring color and joy in maybe a courtyard or you know, some sort of a patio area, or more of a traditional setup with raised beds. Continuing on, you know, you have this just so many opportunities and expressions of garden opportunities. And the one thing that I also want to add is that we have the benefit of what I call the fourth dimension, which is over time. And especially in a limited place, you don't have to see your limited space as a one-shot deal. You know, you're looking over time, and plants, especially annual plants, have a very short lifespan. So if you plan accordingly, you can get things started while other things are ending, and you can move things into places where other things are. So you have the benefit of time and I call that the fourth dimension. And that's a way to add sort of more quantity into your plan with a limited space. This gentleman is an important person I had the pleasure to have met. He was definitely inspired by Alan Chadwick, definitely a scientist, and he developed this form of taking the synthesis of the French intensive and the biodynamic and called it biointensive agriculture. And he has this famous book, which is just reprinted, and I have a copy of it on my desk here, how to grow more vegetables on less space than you ever thought imaginable, something like that. I can't even read that fine print, but it's something like that. Anyway, I mention him because he was at the forefront of helping, especially in Africa and places where resources are scarce, to take these principles and apply them directly to their home environments for the purpose of accessing food directly where they didn't have it. And so he's done important work all around. He's still alive and still does important work, but has been doing this important work for the last 30 years. And so I want to acknowledge him, and I have been inspired by his efforts to reach out to his fellow man in the world, and not just nationally or in the state of California, and give back, you know, the inspiration and the knowledge that he has gained through his experiences in a meaningful way. This other gentleman, Mel Bartholomew, I mentioned because he had a very wonderful way of presenting organic or sustainable techniques in a kind of a very palatable and easy to grasp method called the square foot gardening. And it sounds hokey, but really when you look at it, it's very practical and very useful in the way that you break down your garden space in order to see the potential to grow a myriad of vegetables together in a limited space and get the most out of that space with your, the way that you organize your plantings. So I think he had a very profound effect on the broader communities in the United States and globally towards gardening, especially in the 90s and the turn of this century into this century. Coming into, now this last decade and moving forward, we have this this major impediment, I believe, to sustainability as it relates on the local level and to equity for those who have limited resources, and that's the global economy and the food system that exists, and all the different components that are required to get your food from the grower to the consumer. And so many things can go wrong in the process. And the longer the food takes to get from here to here, the less quality that you have, because it's a living thing and it has a limited, shelf life. So the most equitable and the most direct is to go from where the consumer is the producer or very close to it, the neighbor, for example. This is the most equitable. This is the most empowering. This is the most dynamic and forward thinking, sort of like recycling, if you will, this idea that is not new, but it's very apropos as we move forward into the world to recognize the importance of empowering ourselves to grow food again and to be the producer. And that brings us to urban gardens and some other influential people that I think are noteworthy, not exclusive because there's others, but I'm just focusing on a couple that I know specifically and that I can fold into this in a meaningful way into this presentation. So urban gardens, gardening is basically, now that we have major established cities all over the place and there's urban burnout, and especially in the inner cities where we have what they call food islands, where there's, all the good food doesn't get to some of the ghettos and some of the places where people of limited means exist. So the best recourse is for those people to empower themselves to grow food for themselves. And we have this urban gardening movement, especially in the inner cities. And there's a gentleman by the name of Will Allen, who's a professional football player, and created the Growing Power in Milwaukee, and it was just a major sort of a community building opportunity, not just for food, but it was work, it was empowerment, and there were a lot of dynamic business opportunities that were folded into this. This program is, I think, had some problems, and I sort of had to fold. But Will is still growing, and I understand his daughter. They have maybe more modest programs, but they're continuing to do their work, and I think it's noteworthy because here's a gentleman that has made money in the professional ranks, and he's chosen to dedicate his life to helping his fellow citizens who have limited means to become empowered and to access food directly. And then, of course, Ron Finley, who a lot of people know, they call him the urban gangster or the gardening gangster, the gangster of gardening. He's a sweet gentleman, and he really, I love his very genuine approach to growing food and wanting to share his knowledge with his neighbors and people in South Central LA. And just like he was saying, I got tired of driving 45 minutes round trip to get an apple that wasn't impregnated with pesticides. I mean, they had, it's amazing, it's atrocious what people in the inner cities are lacking and what they're not getting, what we all deserve. You know, we're talking about equity, we're talking about caring about people. This is at the core of all of that, right? So I honor and I praise the work of this gentleman and others like him, who are bringing to the common people, to the regular people, especially people with limited means, some of the best food possible that they can actually grow themselves. And this brings us, you know, the reason why I've been spending all this time talking about all these people and the process that I go about to determine what, you know, helps plants grow in a healthy way, is because this is the payoff. It's in the harvesting, and we're gonna, if we do these things, then good chance that we're gonna end up with nutrient dense, uh, very vital food that we will be nourished by, and that we can be nourished by, and we can create this for ourselves, right? And this is the payoff, and this is the reason why I frame this presentation in the way that I do. This implement on the right is a refractometer, and it can show bricks, which is a sugar content, and it's relative to the calories, the caloric content of a plant. I mean the caloric, yeah, content versus the nutrient content, and there's a ratio there. That's how they determine nutrient density is determined. And it's recognizing as well when the plants are at their peak, what phase of their life are they producing the most nutritious food. So it's observational, and it's also known, there's information on it. And then ultimately, and the turnaround for the gardener is seed saving. Now more than ever, we need to not only engage seriously and with intent in the act of growing food, but we need to make sure that we preserve those varieties into the future like people used to do, which is by saving seeds. And many times we don't allow the plants to get to this part because we've eaten the material, or it doesn't look as sightly, as organized as it might when it was younger. But we need to appreciate this for what it is. Not only is it providing seeds, but there's pollen and nectar in the flowers for all the beneficial insects and the wildlife that is also an important part of the garden environment, a healthy garden environment. So seed saving is so important, and this is equally a part of the garden endeavor as much as the growing and the harvesting of food, if not more so. And we talk about going back to and getting away from, we want to avoid the GMO seeds and the patented seeds. We want to go back to the open pollinated seeds that are of nature's, giving, and that we need to maintain and manage and to share with others, so that we can continue to cultivate the strains that have provided the most nutrition for us as we move forward into the future. These are just some terms for that go along with seed saving, open pollinated, cross pollinating, self pollinating, all these things I talk about in my small scale food production class. And then these are just basic charts for recognizing what plants are required, what they require to grow well out into the point of producing seeds, and then how best is that harvested and stored. So with that, I will leave you with my name and contact information, just in case you're interested in what I had to share here. This is, certainly my life's work, just much like the people at Quail Springs. We're living this information and this work. So we're open to sharing it. And here's my contact email and my phone number. But I'm sure that the kind people at Quail Springs will share all of that with you, along with that of everybody else who's contributing to this fine presentation, broader presentation. And with that, I'll leave you today. And I hope that this inspires you to continue or to start the work that you're doing to grow food for yourselves and your neighbors. I hope dearly that that you can take away from what I'm sharing with you some tidbits, some information that will make your work even more profound than it already is. We need each other. We need all of us to do this work. It's so important, and we need to continue now more than ever and bring this back to the local level that it belongs, and with the people that that greatly need it. So with that, I'll say good night and goodbye, and I look forward to further conversations with you. So have a great day. Thank you.